Let's see, I've got Chris Tompkins. He is joining me here, and we are going to be talking about decluttering your L&D toolkit, tools, content beyond. This specifically was from all the questions that have been coming in over the last 15 sessions from people going, hey, like, how do we make this work with our LMS, and what are the different tools, and how do we bring it together? So this really was a session specifically brought on by all of you. Chris, I can never, like, great name, by the way. I go by Christopher. I actually don't like Chris, but do you prefer Chris or Christopher?
Only my mom calls me Christopher. It's far too formal for me. I'm more of a casual Chris.
Okay. So here's the thing. People who know me, I have a hard time correcting people when they call me Chris, because people look at you like you ask them to say Esquire at the end of your name. You're like, no, it's not. And you're like, oh, fine. It's a 3-syllable name. So anyway, but I respect that. But Chris, still a great name. So with that,
we both agree it's hard to trust a topher.
True. Christopher, Chris, you're good to go. That's true. Or if it's, for a while I was big into crisscross. I think I spelled it with a K for a bit. People always kind of side-eyed me like, really? Is that really how you spell it? So anyway, with that, let's get a round of emojis. Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you. I will be back up on stage towards the end, but I'm going to let you get to it.
Man, you don't want to hang out as we discuss learning ecosystems.
Oh, are you kidding? I am the learning tech geek. So I would sit here and we'd be here till about 12 o'clock tonight if we did that.
Awesome. Well, hey, I play behind the scenes in a lot of learning technologies, 7TAPs included. So great to have a room full of folks that I consider to be my people. There are probably a handful of folks on the planet that really get jazzed about talking about this topic, but clearly you all are here. I love that the chat in this thing feels a lot like a Rustici Slack channel. The GIFs are flowing. I love it. It's a big part of my day. So clearly I fit well with this crowd. Why am I here? I help e-learning companies play nicely with one another. So if anyone in my personal life is unfortunate enough to be like, well, what do you do? I help e-learning tools get along. We do that through a deep expertise in these weird acronyms like SCORM, AICC, CMI5, LTI. I know a ton about each one of those things, mostly so that no one else on this call really has to. These standards are very pedantic, they're very specific, but they really solve a lot of challenges. And Rustici Software has been behind the scenes in building the standards and advancing them. We work very closely with ADL, with the IEEE. I personally sit on 2 different IEEE boards that are driving xAPI and CMI5 forward. So this, right, wrong, or indifferent, is the passion of the 50 or so people, mostly in Nashville, Tennessee, that work on these things day in and day out. Rustici is not a household name, but we are behind the scenes in most authoring products that know how to save as. We are behind the scenes in most of the learning management systems that play and track things. And we have tools that allow folks to live in between those worlds. It's only 3 things that we do as a business. As we go through stuff today, we're going to review the common tools and platforms that you guys probably use on this call. From what I've even seen during today's Microlearning conference, this is clearly my target audience. We're going to identify some ways that you can live in a management moment between all of those tools, and then kind of talk through what do some folks do. The key takeaways, if we have time, hey, I'd love to just answer questions because this can be a dry topic. So we always kind of thought that 25 years ago, when these standards are being written, that there would be one learning management system to rule them all. And on day 1 of your career in a hospital, you would be placed into this thing. And of course, we know everything there is to know about nurse training because they all do it in this one LMS. So you build a piece of training in a tool of your choice, you put it in the system, and you see the report in that system, and everybody's fine. But as we start to look at 2024, Rustici works with some of the biggest brands on the planet, and the average size of hospital or a large organization or even a giant nonprofit has around 25 learning technologies flying around. All of them will tell me out of the gate, hey, we've got one LMS to rule them all, except for this group. And well, we do have that piece of training over here, and oh, those contractors, yeah, they don't get in there. They live in the system over here, and we have this other thing that talks to them. All organizations are in a learning ecosystem. And I think that it is important to think through, hey, how do people normally train and learn at your organization? Where are the moments that people are clicking play or that other teams are training on things? And this desire to have one LMS to rule them all is probably too much work. It's certainly too many politics. Every different department or schoolhouse or whatever. It could be in the military. It could be in a manufacturing organization. It could be in high finance or real estate. They all have reasons why, oh, our team's completely different. You don't understand the way we roll. We have to have it this way. So that problem exists. It persists. And a lot of folks really need to realize that that's fine. It's okay. And there are some easy ways to get around it. If we think of the clusters inside of those large organizations, there's really a divide between them from a tools perspective. So you're either focused on content. Oh, we've got a VR initiative. Oh, you don't understand. We have these training manuals that live within a librarian inside a secret squirrel, and these things have to be updated. And people care about content for the right reasons, and they should, and they always will. You then have this like chasm between folks that care about reports, home office, board level stuff at a big company, department heads, regional managers. There are folks that only look at, are we in compliance? What are our learning initiatives? Has everybody participated in this program? What's leading to sales stuff? And often they're not the same human beings in charge of both things. And it's kind of time to say, that's cool, that's okay. Let's zoom in a little bit on each one of these clusters, because in order to untangle this knot, we have to kind of track back where some of the threads go. And one group of folks, and I think it's probably this room, is really focused on the content. And so I want to help kind of declutter and demystify some of what's going on in organizations, because the content hub is for instructional designers. It's for the folks that are doing the training, that care about the efficacy, that want to build a better way to train next year on the same piece of training everyone took this year. And that hub includes the things you're getting out of authoring products. It could include LCMSs. There's a lot of off-the-shelf libraries and content that exist and that people can do either for mandatory compliance reasons or because they want to go learn more. The off-the-shelf content exists all over the place, from LinkedIn Learning and Go One and Open Sesame. And there's a plethora of ways you might be able to go buy a lot of things. And I think some of the off-the-shelf content vendors, hang their hat on having a zillion titles in their library, where I think clever content folks know the two pieces of courseware in this library that you should take next. Having a lot can often tangle the web more than knowing which three are the most important. Video libraries exist. I think every large organization I've ever talked to is like, we're going to build a YouTube for our own stuff. Great, you should. Simulations and virtual reality, I love. It's amazing. I play with that stuff in my personal life, and it is the core part of how I think we're going to start learning 2025 and up. If you take the time to categorize, to catalog all of the content and tools that you're using, there are ways to bring them into one place. Big props to 7TAPS, like in full disclosure. Rustici helps them with a piece of technology that allows you to keep your content in 7TAPS and more easily connect to the learning systems that have a play button that are meaningful in the world. I think content teams that kind of have their silo, or I guess in this case, it's more of a pile of things that they're working on, and they are clever enough to just go where the trainers live, that becomes a really big asset. On the other side, we have to kind of consider maybe folks on this call are more removed from frontline training, and you're actually trying to show the board or your department heads, look, I was a good steward of these resources, as meager as they might be for L&D sometimes at organizations. But you gave us this chance to go train things. We kept everyone in compliance. That's always the most important thing. And we have a hub that can prove that. We have a way to consolidate a bunch of activities across the various LMSs that you have, and this one thing that has Moodle, and this other thing that's in Docebo, and every group has a lot going on. And some of the ways that you might see that are learning record stores. I'm a big proponent of xAPI, given the time today and the likelihood that, like, I'll put all of you to sleep with these standards, but a learning record store could be a unique hub for folks knowing they're in a tangled web of systems and need a centralized way to track a learner's activity through all of it. You could look at a learning analytics platform. Watershed LRS, Yet Analytics, Veracity, Learning Locker, and Learning Pool are an example of a class of products designed to help tie together activities and learning that are all over the place so that you get a holistic view in one spot of how people are doing, some dashboards to measure performance. And then, of course, we have the rise of Power BI and similar tools to that. Often it's important to realize that those tools are not statement storage. And what I mean by that is that Power BI is very powerful. It does a lot of cool things. It can manage a lot of data from a lot of different sources, but it is not a pile of data. It looks at data in places and does amazing graphs and charts, but often it requires some concept of centralized database, which a learning record store is actually a very good place to do that within our world. The benefits of kind of taking a breath and building those things out and being careful and considerate around a reporting strategy is that you do end up with one learning record to rule them all. It's not in the learning management system, but that's okay. We do end up with a spot that's meaningful and impactful. You get data portability between tools. I don't think a lot of folks realize, but when a big organization decides to switch learning management systems, keeping the content in flight is key and important. And there's never one day where a learner is just in a new system. Often the folks who are building courses, who are building training, who have a library of microlearning need a way to play nicely in both LMSs, a switch kit of types. And often that is a great strategy to take. And I think it's an advantage of using tools like 7TAPS in those ways. I think it's also important to realize that you can start to report outcomes and metrics alongside of the learning and training data. What I mean by that, a learning analytics platform can often look at, hey, here was the catalog of required learning. Here are the real world outcomes in the hospital setting. To build off of our last conversation, we've actually been able to look at, hey, how are particular workers doing on the hospital room floor? They change bed sheets, they administer Tylenol, they use CPR. Oh, well, this particular human, Christopher, saves more lives than anyone else on staff. Why? What are the training and learning experiences that differentiate one performer from another? And if you track the traditional e-learning results and you compare it against the live hands-on training of a Rustici and dummy, or even in VR or something, and you keep the data in a learning analytics platform to know who's doing what on the hospital room floor, I feel very strongly that learning teams who study outcomes can go build better learning. And often a course creator never gets a utilization report from an LMS administrator. For whatever reason, every LMS administrator I've ever met has 47 other jobs, and often like running another report for a course creator never happens. And if content teams can't study the outcomes of their content, how do you expect them to build better courses? So I think the 360 review involves a reporting hub that is meaningful and impactful. And there's more than one way to approach that. And I don't know that any one of them is right. But it is important to have a considered strategy and to understand that this is a tangled web. It's not just your company or your organization, and there are ways to untangle that knot. So you got to bring order to the chaos. Where do you fall between these three piles of learning? Certainly, all of you cross this continuum. That's not the point I'm trying to make. It's not a clear picture, but Are you focused on trying to consolidate the learning within your organization? Are you focused on trying to prove to the board L&D's budget drove change more than anyone else's? Or are you stuck in the middle of all of these technologies and you need a way for a learner journey to smoothly move from one or the other? And once you have a better understanding of that approach, I feel like it begins to provide some clarity to the picture. You can start to untangle a knot if you track through all of the threads. So you're going to have a lot of tools. Cool. Keep buying more. Keep trying new things. Like, it's an important part. Collaborate with the folks. If you're on the front lines of building training, go talk to the board, go talk to your manager, understand what their big, hairy, audacious goals are of an organization. And if you do that, you can start to adapt to feeding the machine in a way that helps you grow your department, not necessarily be at risk. So identify the things that you can do easily, use smart tools, and more importantly, if you find yourself in these arguments, if you find yourself in conundrums, I'm not here to be a consultant to help you reorganize your learning department. We solve real problems about interoperability. There's a very strong chance all of the tools in your ecosystem are Rustici customers behind the scenes. And my encouragement here is ask us anything, really. We're not a high sales pressure organization. You're probably using a bunch of my customers' tools, and I love them all equally. I could be among the most neutral folks in the e-learning industry to take a big breath together, to start to look at the knot you've tangled and to help sort out the easiest and most efficient ways to make it easy on you to untangle the knot. So open door here. If there's anything I can do on this topic, great. If you don't care about this stuff at all, I completely understand. I've never heard of SCORM before I started here. So also good. Let me know how I can help. It's a weird niche, but it's one that the folks at Rustici know and love and own really well. We're always happy to help.
Chris, I knew I was going to love this one. And then when you started going, I'm like, oh man, my people are here, especially because the only downside was I did have a little bit of PTSD back to my GE days where I was brought in specifically to make sense of the system architecture. And I remember going through literally thousands of systems and going, you want me to do what within this? And even the sheer act of even just organizing them into categories of, so what does this even do and who's using it and why do we have 13 versions of it? I mean, it was chaos. It's a niche system, but it actually, well, and the thing is, it's niche, but it's actually not, because even in small organizations I've advised, like even in a tiny little organization, when you start tracking, okay, what tool do you use for this? What tool do you use for this? What, all of a sudden you're like, there's like 48 tools and you're a company of 52 people. Like, how on earth did you get to this space? It's not just a big organization problem.
Yeah. And they all view it as being unique. Like, oh, we've messed this up somehow. I don't know how this got so bad, but it's just the normal way to do it.
That's the normal way. That's why I loved
your. You have on your phone a bazillion. Cool. That's just the way things go.
Yes. And I love the fact that you bring it with like a no judgment. Cause I've like, there've been many times where people are like, I feel really guilty about this. You're like, this is just what happens. Somebody found an app and they signed up for it because they were like, cool, let's try it. And then pretty soon they signed a subscription and some functional group put it on a P card and didn't tell IT. And next thing you know, heck, I have to do it for myself. Every year I go through my own app ecosystem and I'm like, what apps are in my ecosystem that I'm subscribing to?
Like, this is crazy. Why are we still doing this? But it's also important to realize that as you evaluate new tools, 100% of organizations of all sizes, I work with some of the biggest and craziest, the Department of Defense included, it's a crawl, walk, run process every single time. No one doesn't crawl, walk, run. And it's how you end up with a complicated ecosystem, because at no point are you like, oh, this tool is going to fundamentally change my department. The next thing you know, 5 years later, hey, we can't live without that tool. It will fundamentally. So it's a slow roll, and it's add new tools, drop new tools off, map the ecosystem.
It's never ending. That's the thing. There's not like, I remember in many organizations, like, okay, when's this project done? And you're like, It's not.
We're going to stop doing compliance.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, then we're going to keep working on this project.
We're just going to keep working on it.
L&D departments are often static resources, especially at the time. So the more you can go to the stakeholders and say, I was the best possible steward of the things that I was given. Look at the changes that I've made. I kept us out of trouble in these ways. I grew these initiatives in these others. That's where these hubs begin to matter. And that's why understanding where you can see activity and making strides towards centralizing it has real impact.
Well, and I think one of the things to what you're talking about that I would just add to the people that are left on here is it's a technical thing, but it's also not a technical thing. Sure. Like so much of what I've done, it's always like relationship building, because you're going to somebody going, I know you use this tool and I know you love it.
Yeah.
But could we possibly talk about how we might be able to do this? And if you're just a jerk or they don't like you or don't trust you, you might as well just forget it, because they'll be like, yeah, sure, you can take away my e-learning authoring tool over my dead body.
Right. But so a short anecdote, often the way I find common ground with folks, if I say SCORM, man, people just fall asleep immediately, right? It's not interesting and it shouldn't be. But if you and I start a band tomorrow, we could mix a song on my phone using GarageBand. We could go to Nashville and
I'll have AI write it for us
and use Pro Tools. But you're not going to look at me and be like, yo, Chris, you're the nerd in the band. Go write an MP3 by hand.
Right.
No, the tool makes an MP3 and we give it to somebody. And when they hit the triangle button, our music comes out of their speakers the same way. So often finding common ground with your team, relating it to music or MP3s to help them understand that like this is a time where like it's technical, but it's also not. And no one argues with me about SCORM, so just put me on the phone anytime you want.
Really, because that's usually just such a, like, people usually have such strong feelings and deep convictions about SCORM versus
Dare you to
xAPI.
argue with me about SCORM?
Just set up a little table with the sign.
Come on.
Change my mind.
At this point.
I love it. Well, this has been fantastic.